I hereby introduce to you Mr. Michael Veazey.
Hi there and welcome back to Amazing FBA. Today I'm going to continue the discussion about how to select products. So the first thing we talked about was idea generation, and really that's the kind of fun bit, and that's where you will let your imagination run wild. Don't censor yourself. My tip with any form of brainstorming and then filtering processes is to do exactly that. Just keep them separate so that the brainstorming is simply a gathering together of all possible ideas. That's when you get things that you would otherwise miss because you filter yourself too early. So just separate the two things. Once you've got a good batch of ideas, and exactly how long is a piece of string? I just don't know. But I mean, you can do it in batches, so you can gather ideas, and when it feels like you spend enough time fantasizing about your perfect product, then go and filter. So when it comes to filtering, that is the bit that everyone thinks is, you know, where the magic happens, and it kind of is and it kind of isn't. Like I said in the last video about this topic, so do not look, I'm pleading with you here, do not look for the perfect formula that is going to sort you out just in and of itself, because if you find one and everyone else copies it, it becomes the imperfect formula again. So in other words, if everybody is looking for products, and here are the famous criteria that are laid out by an awful lot of people, traditionally, if you're looking at products that are selling between $20 and $40 retail and about 3,000 a month of units in sales or more, so about 30,000 for the whole of page one, and under 50 reviews, say in 3 places on page 1, and these are kind of Greg Mercer's numbers, but they're pretty standard numbers that I've heard from so many people over the last couple of years. Yeah, you know what, folks, then yes, you are probably going to be doing the same thing as everybody else. And unfortunately, that means once your product gets to market, it's going to be competing with everybody else on a pretty level playing field, which means you'll be shopped on price, and that means the only person who's going to win out of that is a Chinese supplier with massive loans from the Chinese government at a funny old rate of interest, and who can mass produce stuff at a really low cost. So I mean, that is something you really want to be avoiding. Okay, so now how do we get around that? Well, the first thing to say is there is no one size fits all, even as a way of avoiding that, because the first thing is, how much money have you got to spend? Private labeling is not for those of a faint heart, and is also not for those with a small budget. If you are, if you've got a budget of less than £3,000 and that's a real minimum now, I think, or $5,000, and by the way, they're not equivalent anymore. I would say if you're buying from China or anywhere that's US dollar denominated, which is most of us now, if you're based in the UK, you probably need closer to £4,000, but I really think that's a minimum. I recently placed a first order with a friend in a new business for just a sort of tryout order for £5,000, which is whatever, $6,500, $7,000, and that really felt pretty minimal. We're pretty restricted by that budget. So I really do think that budgets need to be realistic. Okay, now if you're looking at a budget of $20,000 or equivalent, that's going to give you quite a different way of starting than if you're just starting with a few $1,000s. By the way, if you're starting with less than that, you need to do online arbitrage or retail arbitrage, I think, or wholesale. Now, those aren't areas that I teach because I haven't done them myself yet, but I am in conversation with some experts in those fields to create some kind of training, or to at least give you some good pointers for that, because I know that that's becoming a point of great interest. Again, that came up with the mastermind meeting recently in October. There was a lot of interest in online arbitrage as a way of getting going whilst, you know, building up capital for a full-on private label business. So small aside there, but if you have got limited capital, you're going to have different choices. Now, the traditional thing is to go for something that's going to cost you $2, $3 a widget to buy, and then sell it for $20, or maybe, you know, that would be optimistic. Maybe it's more like 15. I would strongly suggest that you go for the best quality product in your category that you can possibly afford, and then work on having fewer units. Now, if you have an order of 3,000 units, and this is all about supply negotiation, and that's a different video, right? That's a different audio and a different experience. But if you have 3,000 units, you're obviously going to get a better price per unit than if you just order, say, a few hundred. But I would strongly advise you, even if you're testing out a market, if it's a full-on private label product, don't be cheapskate. Get the best product you can afford. Now, what does that mean? I mean, if you've got $20,000 to deal with, you know, it's a different thing than 3,000. But let's take, for example, I'm not going to give you silicon spatula because that's just overused to an insane degree. But let's say a garlic press, okay, which I know Scott Volker's very fond of over at the Amazing Seller podcast. if you have a bog standard dull looking garlic press, we've got one in the kitchen, so I'm just thinking it's sort of dullish metal, it gets bits stuck in it, you can't clean it very easily, it stays smelly. So you probably be wanting to look for the best materials, the most ergonomic design, fantastic rubber handles. You want to make it gleaming in chrome, maybe you have red handles, maybe you make it different in that way. Put it in the best, sexiest packaging you can get, make it sort of a molded plastic insert and then a cardboard box around it. So you are probably going to be wanting to get the best thing you can possibly get in that category, right? Now, the halfway house between ideas in a category and a physical actual end product is the filtering system. So I would suggest that you try and sell not at a mid price point, but at the highest price point you can afford to buy at. This is the new normal, because if you're selling cheap stuff, you will be shopped on price. So I think you really want to be looking at the highest price point you can get away with within your budget. So I don't think you should put the limitation being the Amazon buyer's mindset of I'm not going to buy something above $40, because that's just not true. There are wealthy people who shop on Amazon for sheer convenience. There are people who buy stuff worth over £100 on Amazon all the time. Yes, maybe they shop around a bit more, right? Which means you've got to build a good brand. But I think the days of cheap tat on high volume are going by the wayside, particularly in the USA, particularly now that it's hard to get reviews and it's hard to do giveaways and so forth. And we'll talk about that whole area in another video, right? But if you want to sell a really high-end product, I would encourage you to do that. I think your limitation is not the Amazon consumer, it's your budget. So I would say your budget is the starting point for product selection. Hope that makes a little bit more sense. So I would be tempted to go in and do the opposite of the traditional criteria. I'd say I want products between, if I'm, for example, using a tool like web app of Jungle Scout, for example, I would go in and say between $40 and $100 selling price, and then within a certain category, and see what comes up there. And it's going to be quite a different product. I would then potentially go over to Alibaba and have a look at what is those sorts of products they're selling for. Now, of course, that's the kind of BS price for people who don't bother to negotiate, and those aren't real prices. So you might even want to go and talk to a couple of suppliers just to get some potential prices, not because you're particularly looking for suppliers at that point, just because you're just checking whether there's any profitability in that marketplace. So this isn't the complete picture. I can give you a much more in-depth view of this, but I wanted to give you an overview and the philosophy going into which criteria do you use, how do you filter down. I think the starting point is your budget, not the Amazon buyer's budget, not the consumer's budget, because the consumers out there that will spend a large amount of money, and that is where the profitability is going to be. If you get some widget that's shipped over that's too obvious, everyone else will be selling it. If you get something where it's too cheap and the profit margin's only a few dollars, that will be eaten up by Amazon ads costs. So it's a double whammy if you get an obvious cheap product. So go for the non-obvious. So the final point to say is, as Greg Mercer says, this weirdness test, and again, I am with him on that. Just try and pick something that's a bit odd that you hadn't ever thought of. You're wandering around Argos and you see some strange widget in the kitchen section that turns out to be for draining spaghetti or something. I have no idea, right? But you get the idea. Some weird widget, but which actually is kind of catching on in a very minor way, but you're in the early days of that trend. That's a great place to be. So that kind of thing. So use your imagination and don't limit mentally what people are going to spend with you. It's not a question of limiting what the Amazon consumer will spend with you. I personally now, I'm going to be trying to sell the most expensive products I can possibly afford to buy, because it is going to differentiate me from the masses. I don't really care, and this is the final point, I do not use as a criterion anymore X unit sales per day, right? I need to know about that because it is going to affect my launch costs. But actually what I really want is profit and following that, revenue in dollars or pounds rather than number of units sold. For example, if I can sell about $5,000 worth of stuff per month at a decent margin, I'd much rather have that. And if that happens to be a $100 product, that means maybe I'm only selling 50 a month. I don't care about that at all. In fact, there's a hidden advantage to that, and that's two things. Number one, I'm paying once for a pay-per-click ad each time somebody clicks on that. And if I have to take five ads, if it's a conversion percentage of 20%, if I have to take 5 clicks rather, then if I'm selling one widget for $100, then that $100 sale is only going to cost me 5 clicks, right? So maybe $5 if I'm unlucky. If I have to sell 10 widgets at $10 each, I'm going to have 50 clicks to make those same sales. So my cost of advertising is way lower with a big, chunky, expensive product. The other thing to say is that I really don't care about the revenue that much. If I sell a $100 widget and I make a $40 margin on it, then that's much more exciting to me than if I can sell $200 worth of $10 widgets, but actually I'll make a tiny little margin out of it. I want the money for myself. So the final thing to say is that really I would encourage you to sell the most expensive item you can, but don't BS yourself that you can just take some off the shelf rubbish and slap a private label on it and sell it for good money. As Adam Hudson said recently, and I thought he was really on the case with that, and Kevin King has said in the past, which is pretty much the most popular interview I've done so far, in terms of the numbers of people visiting and coming back and the comments I've had. Those two guys have got it right, which is like you be obsessed with great quality, make a fantastic product. But even at the product selection criteria stage, I encourage you to go for quality, go for difference, go for fantastic, and have some courage to stick to your guns with that. Don't buy cheap tap from China and expect to make a profit. That's it. Thanks, guys. As ever, come back to me with your thoughts and comments. I'd love to meet you on the Facebook group, so www.amazingfba.com/FB Facebook. And if you actually want to meet me in person, the only way at the moment to get access to me is at the masterminds. So check that out, www.amazingfba.com/mastermind. And if you're interested in that, I'd love to hear from you if you want to put an application in. Other than that, guys, get out there and use your imagination. It's not enough to follow a formula anymore, so start using the old neck-top computer. Thanks, guys. Speak to you in the next episode.